Welcome back to the Centered on Buffalo podcast. This week's guest is Joe Marino, the host of Locked On Bills, and you can find out everything about him at thejoemarino.com. One of my favorite follows on social media, one of my favorite podcasts to listen to as I prep for the broadcast each week. So it's going to be fun breaking it down today, all that's been going on with the Bills. We have the loss to Denver last week. We have the firing of Sean McDermott, the press conference that everyone's talking about, our new coaching search. Take a look at this weekend's games, and we're going to have some fun with this one. Thank you to all the subscribers out there. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast weekly. Leave us a rating, a review, and comment who you want to hear on the podcast in the future. Enjoy the podcast and go Bills.
Hit us up on all social media at The Buffalo Pod.
Let's take a moment to hear from the founder of Dano's Seasoning, Dano himself, Dan Oliver.
What's up, Eric Wood fans? Check this out. Eric told us his favorite 6 Danos because we wanted to do a bundle just for you guys. So we got the OG, the spicy, the primo, the red pepper seasoning, the crunchy, and the chipotle. All this for a special deal. Get 15% off. Use the code EWOOD right now on our website. Yum, yum. Get you some.
Joe, welcome back on the podcast, brother.
Good to be on with you. Unfortunately, there's just nothing to talk about right now, you know?
I know. I wish we were talking about us heading into New England to just completely spoil their magical season and us ride off into the sunset, into the Super Bowl. But we're not. We dropped that one at Denver last week, and we've had a chaotic week. Have you had time to catch your breath this week?
By the end of the week, I felt like I have had that opportunity, but it's definitely a week where, as somebody who doesn't pull away and detach very often, I found myself wanting to do that. Like, just put the phone down, go for a walk, go to the gym, go to the sauna, just clear my mind, because it's been a lot. It's been heavy. There's been a lot of reaction. And as somebody who talks through it on a daily basis, you know, if there's been a heaviness to this week for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I was telling you before we got going on Sunday, you know, the season's over. It's a lot of travel for me during the season, this and that. It's over now. I got a couple of things to do Monday with One Bills Live and whatnot, but that's not till 2 p.m. I'm like, okay, I'm going to drink some beer. So I'm going to let loose on Sunday with my buddies, watch these games, had some people over. I wake up a hair fuzzy on Monday morning, not expecting that news to come out, which just created a whirlwind of media appearances and all of that. But me being a little under the weather on Monday was not of anybody's concern. We had much bigger things going on out there, and I was happy to speak into it and maybe provide some context, but wasn't planning on that Monday. So hopping into it, Monday morning, Sean McDermott, it's announced that he was let go from the Bills, and disappointment of the loss turned into a whole lot of chaos. Let me just ask you this. Are you surprised that there's been so much backlash towards the Bills over the McDermott firing? Because, you know, if this happened after the 13 seconds game, I think there might have been more celebration. And now there's a petition that's signed by tens of thousands of people to reinstate Sean McDermott. Has any of this backlash surprised you?
I'm a little surprised by it. I feel like this has been as big of a lightning rod of a topic as there's been since I've been in the space talking Bills. And you felt like the fan base in some regards was ready to move on from Sean McDermott, and then it finally happened, and then there was this upheaval of people that are pretty upset. And so I think ultimately Sean McDermott, despite the game in Denver and failing in the playoffs, it felt like he had a good year.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it was getting a lot out of that defense in ways that maybe people didn't expect, whether it was the way that he embraced the closure of the stadium and really felt like he did everything he could with the Marv Levy hat and the pictures at the stadium the night before, and his comments towards Buffalo and Bills Mafia, the piece in The Athletic that really kind of dove into him in ways that we never really saw. And I think he endeared himself in new ways to this fan base. And simultaneously, maybe the other side of that was most people believe that there was a talent issue on this team that was kind of holding it back. And so the consequence of Sean McDermott being fired and then Brandon Beane staying and getting a promotion, I think was hard for a lot of people to come to terms with. And the timing led to maybe a reaction that was different than a lot of people might have expected.
No doubt. And, you know, the spelling error with the statement, initially, and then not, they were about a day late posting Sean's statement that he made and all that. And so maybe not handled that well. It's been a long time since the Bills have let go of a head coach. It's been since 2016, 9 years. And it's a much different day and age in social media nowadays, even since then, of kind of pushing out the messages and all of that. And so all that being said, maybe not handled perfectly PR wise by the Bills either, but I'm a little bit surprised by it just because, I get people constantly on my social media telling me it's time to move on from McDermott, and I'm defending him constantly, saying he's a very good ball coach. Who do you want to bring in? Who's going to replace him? People are going to be lined up to bring him in. And all that being said, I also just feel like, in leadership positions, you have to make very difficult decisions. This was not an easy decision for Terry Pagula to make. He's, and you saw him struggle through even relaying that at times in the press conference, where that's not an easy decision for him. He loves Sean McDermott. He's so grateful for what Sean did for this franchise and getting it to the spot where it's at now. And sometimes you have to try and shake things up to get over the hump. And I don't think it was just the Denver game. And Terry's not a perfect public speaker. I will say this. He's a very genuine person. And I love that man. He's done so much for me. He's not a great public speaker, so you can't cherry pick a couple things he said in the press conference and say, "Oh, we got you." Look at Terry Pagula here. This and that. He had a lot of appreciation for what Sean McDermott did, and it wasn't just the Denver game, because people are saying, "Well, if you thought it was a catch, then should he still be the head coach? It's just a bad call." I don't think that was it, and so the firing ends up leading to a press conference that makes national waves in ways that the Bills didn't necessarily expect. One of the biggest things that came out from it was, Keon Coleman catching some shade when Brandon Beane was asked about the receivers, and, Terry saying it was a collaborative draft pick. The coaches really wanted Brandon Beane and all that. I'm just going to say this, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I don't necessarily feel bad for Keon Coleman in this situation for catching some shade. Was it necessary? No. Is it a great look? No. But everyone's saying, "Oh my gosh, he's a 22-year-old. Let's have some grace on Keon." You brought this upon yourself with a lack of personal accountability, showing up late to not even earn a jersey, and at times showing some pretty poor effort. What are your thoughts on just kind of this, hey, let's all feel bad for Keon moment?
Well, I think you can look at it through two lenses. The first one being that the comments from Terry Pagula were completely unnecessary. That didn't need to happen. And I think it distracted from their overall message. And it winds up being this huge soundbite that is gaining more conversation than what they tried to communicate during that press conference. So I felt like it was unnecessary and it took away from the overall messaging. I simultaneously don't necessarily feel bad for Keon Coleman because he has earned it, right? He's earned the criticism. And there's been plenty of public shaming, if you will, through simply being benched multiple times and Sean McDermott having to explain those reasons, and for Keon Coleman to respond the way that he has. I mean, you have the opportunity to avoid this by simply doing the things that you're supposed to do as a highly paid professional athlete for the Buffalo Bills. And so there's that piece of it as well. It kind of goes back to that can all be true while simultaneously none of those comments were necessary during that press conference. And I thought Brandon Beane did a pretty good job of kind of picking up the pieces later on and coming back and saying, he's like, "Look, I wouldn't draft anybody that I don't believe in." And
Right.
I turned in that card, and I thought he did as best he could in the moment on the fly to kind of save it. But I do regret that this winds up being such a huge topic of conversation when it really didn't need to be.
Yeah, for sure. And Brandon even said, like, the book's not written completely on Keon Coleman yet. Shoot. I mean, the fact of the matter is you have a guy on a rookie contract for 2 more seasons. You got to try and get the most you can out of him. Even if he's not going to be a guy that you extend, you got to try and get the most out of him. And look, 2 years into your NFL career, you can grow up. This could be a massive wake-up call for him. I thought he showed up for training camp excellent last year, and whether it's immaturity or just kind of a lack of mental conditioning to be able to push through with that type of effort and accountability for an entire season just wasn't there for him. And maybe it comes. Maybe this is a huge wake-up call, and from the Bills' perspective and my relationship with the Bills, I hope it is the wake-up call that gets him going and kind of sparks him in this early stage of his career. All right. So I listened to your podcast breaking down the head coaching candidates. If you haven't listened to that already, it's over on Locked On Bills. Joe did a great job on the initial, I believe it was 6 coaches that were released that the Bills are going to interview. Joe did a great job in giving some positives and negatives for each guy, because there's going to be positives and negatives for any coach that comes in for an interview. And so go check that out. I'm not going to waste Joe's time having to repeat all of that. But from the list of names that we've gotten so far, so we've got Anthony Lynn, we got Brian Daboll, Mike McDaniel announced now, Lou Anarumo, Joe Brady, Anthony Weaver, Grant Udinski, Davis Webb, you would assume is going to be an interview whenever the Broncos are done. Of those names, do you have maybe a couple that really stand out to you saying, I think this might be the fit?
Yeah, there are a couple. And if I can start by saying this, what do I want the Bills to do? I want them to get it right.
Yeah.
And number two is I want to encourage people to have a very open mind about this process. You're probably going to have your preferences, and you may not get those preferences, but be open to this working out and for them making the right decision. And even if it's not the one you want them to make. From this initial list, the 2 names that really stand out to me as the most intriguing are Brian Daboll and Grant Udinski. And I've kind of clung to this idea of the Bills needing to find their John Elway, okay, Josh Allen, his Mike Shanahan, the guy that's going to come in at this point in his career and really just bring it all together. And John Elway, back with the Denver Broncos in the 80s, he has 9 years with Dan Reeves. They go to 3 Super Bowls. They lose them all, 6 playoff runs. And it never really goes anywhere. And then they get to Mike Shanahan, who coaches Elway for the last 4 years. They win 2 Super Bowls. And what's very interesting about Mike Shanahan's story is that he was Elway's offensive coordinator in the 80s. He leaves to be a head coach with the Raiders, and it's a disaster, right? He doesn't even finish his second season. And then he comes back and, they have their glory together, which a little bit like Brian Daboll, right? You get close.
A lot of parallels.
You leave, you have a bad run with the Giants, you come back and you do it, especially for the hometown guy. Come on, that's a little exciting. And so what's interesting to me about Brian Daboll is, of course, his relationship with Josh Allen. And I really have enjoyed all the different opinions that are out there. Whether I agree with them or not, I think there's a lot to learn from these conversations. And hearing Ryan Fitzpatrick come in and talk about that Josh can take another level. He just needs someone to coach him hard. And, ultimately maybe that should push the Bills away from some of the hotshot young guys, because maybe they'll come in and want to be buddy-buddy with Josh, where at this point it's about pushing him and getting it done. And so I find that interesting. And I think that relationship between Brian Daboll and Josh Allen is very, very unique, in that I think there's conversations and ways that Daboll has spoken to and will speak to Josh Allen that are unlike any other human being on the planet. And that intrigues me a lot. And there's a foundation there. And, I think that in Buffalo, embracing Buffalo is probably more important than any town, right, in city that exists with an organization. Like, you gotta understand the gravity and endear yourself to the community. Certainly Brian Daboll understands that. And I like that a lot. And I think that a lot of the way that he embraces players and interacts with them, I think is really strong and works for what the Bills kind of have in place, because they can't have a full rebuild. I just don't think that's really possible with the resources that they do or do not have. And so I think this is a good chance to pick up the pieces. Familiar voice for Josh Allen. I love the parallels with my Mike Shanahan thing that I keep going back to. And, I think there's more to unlock. I think there's a lot that Brian Daboll can learn and apply from his experiences in New York to Buffalo. And not to mention, this guy's been a part of 5 Super Bowl wins and a college football, national championship. He's been around what the Bills want. And so that intrigues me a ton about Brian Daboll.
And he's also, real quick, he's also been in the league long enough to have a lot of connections to be able to build a staff, because one of the things that's lost in some of these, kind of young hires is the lack of time they've spent in the league to be able to create relationships. And generally, if you're hiring a hotshot young coordinator, the staff he's coming from isn't getting fired. He's not bringing the full staff with him. He might be bringing some quality control guys and whatnot that he knows from that organization, but you're not bringing your staff with you. So Brian Daboll has been in long enough. Now, he's burned some bridges with some defensive coordinators and whatnot, but he has been in long enough to be able to build a proper staff, which I think is a plus for Daboll as well. Let's take a moment to hear from one of our podcast partners, and that's Nugsacks Premium Bagged Reusable Ice. If you're tired of the melted ice, water-filled coolers, and the constant gas station runs to buy bagged ice for your tailgates, check out Nugsacks Reusable Ice at nugsacks.com. That's Nugsacks.com, and use code Buffalo to receive 10% off your first order. Grab your Nugsacks and chill. Let's hear your thoughts on Grant Udinski, because to me, he's kind of a name that's on the rise right now, but not a ton of people know a lot about him.
Very interesting to me, he would. And I don't know how you can't look at the league and see guys like Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan and Kevin O'Connell and Liam Cohen and Dave Canales and not be a little curious about some of these young up-and-coming offensive minds, especially a guy like Grant Udinski, who has worked, of course, this past year with Liam Cohen, has experience with Kevin O'Connell. And that role with Kevin O'Connell was really unique, where he's assigned to special projects, which was a lot of advanced scouting, but also just day-to-day administrative stuff about like weight training and the players. And, can you have them do these things on these days based on other activities they're doing to maximize, output and keep guys fresh? Like, you got to kind of get into the weeds, but you just have a guy here that feels like everyone who's ever been around him just raves about him, raves about the intelligence. He played college ball. Davidson, he goes and plays tight end. At Towson, he's a defensive end. I love that player background that he has, even if it is only at the college level. But then he goes to Baylor, lives out of his car in a Walmart parking lot just to be part of what's going on in Baylor. And then, of course, follows Matt Rule to the NFL with Carolina. And that wasn't a good situation, but I think it's probably good to be around that and kind of learn some things through that process. And so if you're going to take a gamble on the young, bright offensive mind, I feel like Udinski is attractive and somebody that it would be bold, but I don't know that I'm afraid of that. And there's concerns. And I know that it's kind of the opposite of what we just talked about with Daboll. Those are the two names of the 6 reported interviews. Of course, Mike McDaniel becomes the 7th. I would still say that Udinski and Daboll are my 2 most intriguing candidates right now.
Yeah. The Udinski stuff to me reminds me of McVay with the Rams, where I believe they said it, in hindsight afterwards. It's easy to say things, because obviously it worked out and they get their Super Bowl and all that. But basically said they felt like Sean McVay was maybe a year or two, too early to be able to take that Rams job. But they felt like if they didn't hire him on that cycle, they were going to miss him. Yeah. And they just didn't want to miss him. So it'll be interesting to see if Udinski just kind of wows the Bills brass enough that they have to make a decision similar to McVay and say, okay, at 30 years old, is he too young? Maybe, but we're likely not going to be in this position for a while, or we hope we're not. So he might not be there for us to get him the next time. And then, Mike McDaniel's system and having kind of the Shanahan background with some even more creativity and all of that, it's extremely appealing to be able to say, oh my gosh, you put Josh Allen in this offense of talent with him. Oh my gosh, how incredible is that going to look? There's big concerns for me about, just kind of all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes in Miami and, kind of his leadership within an organization. And I'm not so sure how he fits in Buffalo, but hey, he's a bright, you talk about another bright young offensive mind, Mike McDaniel's it. So we'll see how that all shakes out. It was released not long ago from Adam Schefter that Josh Allen is going to have some say in the coaching hire. What are your thoughts on that?
I could probably be convinced in it both being a good and a bad idea. I think there's probably lines that you want to draw where, certain guys have certain jobs. And if you're the quarterback of the team or you're a player on the team, your job's not really to be involved in picking coaches. But I think Josh Allen's different, right? I mean, this is who I believe is the best player in the NFL, which means he's the best quarterback in the NFL, huge influential type guy. And I think by involving him in the process, you give him some ownership, which I think there's probably some value in. And I'm sure you've been a part of a lot of different things in your career, Eric, but I hear about coordinators, offensive coordinators that will consult with their players and say, hey, what plays do you like? What do you want to incorporate in a game? And because they would have that ownership and pick something, they definitely want to make it work. And not that Josh Allen wouldn't want to make anything work, but I think involving him is helpful in that regard. But ultimately, I think where it becomes an issue is if it's only about what Josh Allen wants, and it's not a collaborative process to include all of the decision makers. And so, as long as it's not Josh Allen, get your way no matter what, I think it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and knowing Josh, a little bit, I think he's mature enough and he's so competitive that he's going to simply want what's best for the Bills, not necessarily to say, oh, I love Brian Daboll, bring him back, or
Yeah.
Davis Webb's a good buddy of mine still. We were talking before the divisional round, before Bills Broncos, bring in Davis Webb. That's my guy. I think he's, Josh Allen wants Super Bowl rings more than anything. Besides maybe a healthy pregnancy in birth of his child, when that may be, I'd say Super Bowl ring is 1B behind those things. And so I think he would be mature enough at this stage of his career, especially to be able to make a unbiased opinion and just simply saying, I think this would be the best move for the Bills. All right, so we're going to get to the rapid fire questions brought to you by Dano's Seasoning, and we're going to kind of jump around a little bit here. James Cook was not named a finalist for the Offensive Player of the Year award. Do you feel like he got snubbed?
Of course I want him to be part of that. I think leading the league in fumbles is something to be mindful of. And then I think an Offensive Player of the Year, there's a totality of your production. And when I think you lump together some of the receiving production that exists from a Bijan Robinson or a Christian McCaffrey, I think I can understand it to an extent. So, of course, he led the league in rushing, and that has to matter a ton. But the fumbles and lack of receiving output, I think, allows it to be a pill I can swallow.
Okay. I like that take. Do you think Brandon Cooks caught the football against Denver?
Of course I do.
Yeah.
Of course I do. That catch or that play is ruled a catch every single time I've ever seen it, except for that one. The Khalil Shakir catch a few weeks ago. That was way more of an interception. We saw the Devontae Adams play literally in the next game. I think you could probably talk yourself into, by the letter of the law, you can talk yourself into it being an interception because you have to survive the ground. But I've never seen that play not ruled anything other than a catch.
I agree. And to your point, I understand you got to survive the ground. But saying that the ball popped off of his chest and he wouldn't have caught it anyways, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It was pulled away from him, and I don't see how that is argued the other way. And we'll have to sit around all off season and think about it.
It's so much more than that play, though.
The PI call in the end zone, and I had a talk with another official that was not on the game, and I was talking to him about it, and I said, what do you think about the calls at the end of the game? The PIs on the Bills, the lack of the call on Brandon Cooks in the end zone. And he said, they did a great job throughout that game of letting the game happen. Nothing was egregious, so just keep letting it play. And it allowed it to be a very entertaining, smooth football game. And this is official. I appreciated his take in saying that. He said, when the Brandon Cooks PI wasn't called in the end zone, I thought it was appropriate. But then on the next one, there was a couple ticky-tack ones they did call, and he said, that's your no-no as an official. You have to be consistent throughout. And if it's a penalty in the first quarter, it's a penalty in overtime, and vice versa. If it's not in the first quarter, you can't call it late. And that was kind of his feedback there. Yeah, there was a lot more than the Brandon Cooks catch, but yeah, the PI really ticks me off too. Is Stafford your MVP?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think his impact on that Rams team was significant. Obviously, Drake May had a great year as well, but the quality of opponents and the splits between passing production against teams with winning records, it's night and day. I think Stafford did it against tougher teams. So Stafford.
Yeah, and statistically he had a better year as well.
Yeah.
All right, we got two big games this weekend. Who do you like in the Broncos-Patriots game?
I think the Patriots are going to win, but I'm not quick to dismiss Denver. I think their pass rush. I think they can lean into this game as like defense. You got to go win this for us. They have a good pass rush. They're good at forcing fumbles. Drake May's good at getting sacked and fumbling the football. It's at their place, the altitude, all those types of things. But Jarrett Stidham, keep it between the lines. Don't lose it. I think they'll have a fighting chance. I'm not going to dismiss Denver, but I am going to predict that New England wins the game.
Yeah, when it was released as a 5-point spread, I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
Hey, Vegas, they're not, they didn't give, I assumed it would be released as a touchdown point spread, at least a 7-point spread, maybe bet back down. But the fact that they opened it up at 5, they're in a similar boat as you. All right, last one. Rams Seahawks. I mean, this is going to be a good one. Who you like in this one?
I wish the Rams were playing better. That's what
Right.
struggles. It's a struggle I have. And you go back to the last game that they had, and it was a shootout, overtime. The Rams made a million mistakes down the stretch. It comes down to this for me. Which quarterback do I trust more? It's Matthew Stafford. And not only just in a vacuum, but you're talking about Sam Darnold with this oblique thing. He's not going to be able to just kind of cruise like he was last week, right? He's going to have to do stuff in this game. So I know it's on the road with the 12s there. The Rams aren't playing good ball, but they've shown they can move the ball and score against that Seahawks defense. And ultimately, I trust Stafford more than I do Darnold.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree on both of those picks. Joe, I can't thank you enough for the time. You're one of my favorite guests to have on. You know that. So always appreciate your time. Thanks for making time for me on a busy week. We'll catch up again soon, and maybe we'll be talking about a Bills hire here before too long.
Thanks for having me on, Ewood. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, brother.